I'm Katie Lindenfelser, our founder and executive director of Crescent Cove. And I'm going to ask Kathryn Koehne, our director of nursing, to join me as we welcome you. But we are so happy you're here, and how amazing to be back together. Some of you have been a part of the symposium, and that's why you came in person today, because you know how special and unique these meaningful conversations are that you leave hopefully inspired and just thinking from your heart in all different ways about how we live, how we relate, how we connect to the children in our lives, to our friends and family and the adults in our lives. It's special for all of us to be together again. Our mission at Crescent Cove is to offer care and support to children and young adults who have a shortened life expectancy and to their families who love them. The last time we were together in person was only 1 year since we had opened, but we started the symposium with the intention of having meaningful conversations around the emotional and spiritual aspects of pediatric palliative care in our children and our families. And then we had 3 years of being online, so it's really a gift to be together again in person. And as I looked at our vision statement, because today our symposium is about joy, we include that in our vision statement, that we have a home that is joy-filled, it is love-filled, and those of you who've been there know and experience that every day. I want to thank our team who's been here, Kathryn, Josh, Jenny, Carla, Katie, Josh Winfield, Katie Glitzos, Pam. Did I miss any of our staff who've come? Annalisa, thank you, and Maddie and Jake and Erica, our nurse, who will be speaking today. Thank you. We have the most extraordinary team, and we hope that you have a chance to get to know them too and meet our team here. Ron, who comes to provide therapy as well, Shisaj. And then many of you are volunteers. Would you raise your hand if you're a volunteer at Crescent Cove? Thank you to our volunteers. And to those of you on our symposium committee, we have Elaine Allen, Jeannie Goodspeed, Ted Bowman, who planned much of this content, which is so beautiful, Kathryn Koehne and I, Cheryl Dillio, who's not here, and Dr. Jim Rice, who initiated this whole symposium, and us being a part of the advocacy to support children and families in our community. And some of you are donors. We thank you for that. And some of you are our beloved families, and you're going to hear from a couple of our beautiful Crescent Cove families this afternoon. We want to also thank our sponsors. Sunrise donates a space for us to be here, which we are so grateful. And Josh is here from Gillette Children's. Josh is going to stand up and wave, because should you have any questions about continuing medical education, for which if you're a physician, there's a verification form that you need to sign and hand in at the registration table. And everyone else hoping to have CEUs or CMEs also needs to be sure that they've signed in and out at the registration table. So if that's important to you, be sure that you have checked the box by your name. And if you have any other questions, please ask Josh. And thank you, Josh. It's a big job, and he does this out of the goodness of his heart, as Gillette's has for many years. A reminder, our symposium is being recorded. And if that's an issue, to please let Jenny's right here, let Jenny know. And the lunch period will not be, the table discussions will not be recorded, though they might be taking some B-roll. So we just want you to be aware of that, because we will be sending a link to the content of the symposium next week. So I'll have Kathryn will give you a welcome. We're so blessed to have this amazing director of nurse, our leader here at Crescent Cove, who leads our clinical team. And I think it's really special to have you here, Kathryn. It's our first time, I think, being in a symposium this way. And so here's a greeting from Kathryn.
Thank you. So I'm going to actually ask all of you to think for a minute before we get started, because I've gone to a lot of conferences, and a lot of times you're listening and you're learning, but I want you all to we'll take a couple minutes for you to just kind of quiet in, and I want you to think of one sentence that one person said in your life, whether you were a child or in high school or college, or one of your children or one of your parents. There's gonna be silence for about a minute, and I want you to think of one sentence that made an impact on your life. Thank you. Well, it was a staff meeting, and I know our speaker, Erica, is shaking her head, but my staff, the nursing staff, the clinical staff, our experience coordinator, the admin staff, often I hear things, and then parents, and things that the volunteers say to the children, the things that the children say, they touch me deeply, and I absorb them, and it's made my life so rich for the last almost 5 years. So we were at a staff meeting, and Erica, we were talking about loss and grief and sadness and difficulty and how hard life can be. And the meeting went on for quite some time, and Erica said, our care plans, our medications, everything is built on trying to help these children that have inabilities or lack of whatever. She said, instead of looking at inabilities, I like to look at the capabilities, and not just the things that these children can't do, but I like to watch them so I can discover what they can do. And I wrote it down, and I said, okay, I'm going to remember this. And the symposium came along, and we were meeting with Ted and Katie, and I said, I think this is so profound. This is a sentence I told Erica. I said, I see you on a stage someday, and write a book. And there she is. So the whole theme, the speakers, the presenters, are based on that one sentence that I will never forget. And it's made me look at all of our children differently. So although when I came to Crescent Cove, I fell in love with all the kids immediately, but just that reminder constantly that it's not a sad place, it's joyful, and our theme today is that. So thank you all.
Thank you, Kathryn. That's perfect, beautiful. And now I have the great honor of introducing our moderator, who's been leading and moderating our symposium all 9 years, our most beloved and special Ted Bowman, who's a grief educator and grief counselor in our community. I heard Ted speaking at a hospice conference, and he had just returned from England, providing staff support at children's hospices. And we had just started to work on the one-day building a children's hospice in Minnesota, and I heard him say, why wouldn't we have places like this here? It's crazy. And I ran up through the middle at the break, and I asked if he might meet and be involved, and I think he was hesitant at first and probably thought I was a little wild or crazy. But he has been steadfast and involved, and just an incredible presence, an incredible guide and support all along, introducing us to very special people across the ocean, like Helen and her son Chris, who are speaking today and work at children's hospices there. So Ted, thank you for all that you do at Crescent Cove and for leading our symposium.
Good morning. Would you turn to your neighbors and say thank you for being here? Would you turn and say that to one another? That's the short version of my remarks, and in some ways the whole day. It comes from Bob Vaninga, now a retired professor emeritus in the School of Public Health at the University of Minnesota. And years ago he wrote, those who get through a tragedy, those who get through a rough patch in their lives, those who deal with adversity well, point at least to one person who stood by them, supported them, and gave them a sense of hope. That's what we're about today. So sitting beside you there, around you, and with the children at Crescent Cove and all of the various pediatric settings, we're here for you and want to honor all that you are. So I want to move quickly through some underpinnings to build on what was said in the introductions, just to help us to shift to listen to the voices of our speakers as we go on. And so some principles. If something's unmentionable, it's also unmanageable. We need to talk about the tough stuff as well as the capability stuff. It's also impossible to not communicate, and many of our children have taught us that because they're communicating with different skill set, with different abilities, different ways in which they pass on their messages, and so it's impossible to not communicate. We need to talk about all of these things, the arc of our lives, because not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. How do we break the silent rule in some families? in some settings. Also to hear the larger story. Columbia University Hospital years ago required the attending physician and the nurses on the floors to not only have an adequate medical record, but to write a story about the patient, so that when they came in, they met the person, not just the medical condition. And if they happened to be absent that day, the substitute would read the story of the person who was a grandmother, who was a person with diabetes, who loved gardening, who traveled throughout the world. As we interact with each other, as was just said, understanding is more important than agreement. And then part of what we're doing today is to not just look at the hard stuff. The direction in which you look will determine what you see. Are we willing to look at joy and capabilities and strengths and capacities? And then how things are handled is often much more important than what happens. How is the news shared? How do we begin to interact with one another? So for this symposium, the speakers and participants will address holding spaces for both the heavy and the beautiful. It's what Pauline Boss calls a both and, not an either or approach. That we want to be as comprehensive as we can. There's more to me than a medical or mental health condition. And then the slogan at Crescent Cove is to make moments count, however long they may be, and to realize that all families, all children have strengths no matter the challenges. As someone said at one of the child development centers here in Minneapolis years ago, look for strengths even if you have to send out a search party. They may be hidden in terms of we're not quite aware of their strengths, but keep looking. So last year in the symposium, because of Betty Davies being there, she introduced a new phrase for all of us that she called a milieu of mattering, a milieu of mattering. And so a milieu of mattering is a setting, a culture, an ambiance, a way of working that affirms that all involved, children, parents, volunteers, staff, will affirm and embrace a milieu of mattering. It matters to all involved. The 2023 symposium will affirm and address a milieu of joy, creativity, capabilities, while also addressing living and dying with challenges. So this is a dual process, an oscillation model that now is used throughout the world, created by some of our Dutch colleagues, Strobe and Schut. And it's that we need the ability to move between these two circles, to oscillate. So we need times and places and people with whom we can offload. We can do the grieving. We can wail. We can scream. We can say, this sucks, and whatever it might be that is part of that grieving that goes on. But we also need times and places and venues and people with which to do restoration, attending to life changes, doing new things, to distract. I'm sorry, I don't want to talk about that today. Virginia Satir, a teacher of mine, said years ago, if pain and suffering comes knocking at your door and you're not ready to deal with it that day because you're having a birthday party or you're going to a symposium, then at least practice a bit of Minnesota hospitality and say, oh, you're here. I guess I need to address that, but this is not a good time. Let me show you to a room. I'll be with you a bit later. So it's not that we deny or we move away from it, but we find the best timing to bring our better self to do restoration or loss work. And then you probably can recite this one with me, this wisdom from Piglet. Notice that even though he had a very small heart, it could hold a rather large amount of gratitude. And so there's the mission of Crescent Cove as Katie was introducing it. So for the remainder of this symposium, stories will be told and shared. Would urge you, those of you in the room with us this morning and those of you who are watching this by the video that you'll get later, to listen and let the stories prompt, if this is going to have any utility beyond these hours that we're here together, it's what happens after we're here. It's what happens after we're here. So listen and let the stories prompt your stories and your actions, your ways of interacting with your own family, your ways of interacting with neighbors and friends, the bridge between volunteers and professionals. How do we begin to be a team? Caregiving, we know it takes a team to be a caregiver. It also takes a team to do the kind of work that we all are engaged in. So be aware that we have a mixture of people sitting here in the room. Some are clinicians, some are parents, some are siblings, some are complementary therapists, poets, neighbors, colleagues, all with stories to share. I would urge you to broaden your own circle of conversation. And so each is committed to the best of palliative care. It's person, not condition, or it's a person who happens to live with a condition, but that's not the whole story. Let me reintroduce myself to you. So a model that also has been caught on around the world as an alternative to problem solving, because problem solving, however done well, starts with a problem. It's a reactive model. Whereas appreciative inquiry is that in every system, in every child, in every family, in every, hopefully, pediatric palliative care place, something works well. What we focus on becomes our reality. If we carry parts of the past or present into the future, they should be holistic, not, again, just looking at one dimension, but looking at the whole situation, the whole context. It's important to value differences. Raise your hand, what you saw at the bottom. How many first saw a rabbit? Raise your hand. How many first saw a duck? See, we can see the world a bit differently. And we've got to find ways to interact and to value differences, even between a rabbit and a duck. So just a couple of examples before I introduce our keynote speaker in terms of how we begin to interact around this bridge of oscillation between loss and restoration. This is This is part of a poem by a Newcastle, England woman who was living with cancer. And she wrote a letter to her doctor. This is only part of the letter. Dear doctor, I'm writing to complain about these words you've given me that I carry in my bag. Lymphatic, nodal, progressive, metastatic. They must be made of lead. I haul them everywhere. I've cricked my neck. I've bent with the weight of them. Palliative, metabolic, recurrent. And when I get them out and put them on a table, they tick like bombs and overpower my own sweet-tasting words. Dear doctor, would you listen to my words? Orange, bus, coffee, June, maybe even November, lollipop, monkey, lip. The dialogue goes on between provider and what we might call patient. How do we begin to listen to both voices to hear the fuller stories? Just a couple of other examples, and I'll leave this one up because this is the only one I put in terms of the PowerPoint. This is a grandmother's story in a poem called For Charlotte with Down Syndrome. We are shallow, my dear, if we say that you need our pity since you have a lack. There are many things that you can do, much as we can. You can read and make pretty things. You show skill, though it is hard for you to learn. You teach us patience, yes, but so much more. You keep an eye on us, and you discern our many moods. And then she goes a bit further and says, with hard precision for you, everything is fraught with risk. You run to hug us, never doubt that we can understand and give back to you our love. You've never thought that we should but take your hand gently and replay your total trust. I met you today, and tonight I cannot forget what you are teaching me about being in relationship. How do we discover the strengths? How do we begin to see some of the capabilities? Many people have written the bold statements of what cancer cannot do. Cancer is so limited, it cannot cripple love, it cannot shatter hope, it cannot corrode faith, it cannot destroy peace, it cannot kill friendship. The same kinds of words from people who are living with cerebral palsy. Here, according to research, there are a number of cerebral functions not affected by the palsy. Hope and dreams and love and pride and exhilaration and respect and admiration. All of these ways in which we need to see the whole person. And so, one more, and then let me introduce our keynote speaker. This is a father's story interacting with his daughter. Yesterday, against admonishment, my daughter balanced on the couch back, fell and cut her mouth. Can you kind of picture that scene? Yesterday, against admonishment, my daughter, balanced on the couch back, fell and cut her mouth. Because I saw it happen, I knew she was not hurt, and yet a child's blood, so red, it stops a father's heart. My daughter cried her tears. I held some ice against her lip. That was the end of it. Round and round, bow and kiss. I try to teach her caution. She tries to teach me risk. I try to teach her caution. She tries to teach me risk. Friends, that's what we're beginning to talk about today. What are some of the various messages that we can send one to the other as we go through our experiences?